Okay, here we go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are ready for Parshat Terumah, the Parsha of the Mishkan. So many great lessons to learn from a Parsha, which seems to be just technical and just about the building of the Mishkan. So here we go. Let's dive right in. We begin. Shmot Chav Hey Pasuk Bet. Daber El Bnei Yisrael V'yikhu Li Terumah. The Jewish people are supposed to donate the materials towards the building of the Mishkan. What language does Hashem use? V'yikhu li truma. They should take for me a contribution, a donation. What word should it use? It should use the word v'yitnu. They're giving the donation. They're giving the contribution. Why does the Torah use the terminology of v'yikhu? It says the al shech hakadosh al pidin tzarech haba latet lisha kesef kedushin. We know that in a marriage, the way it works is that the husband gives the wife the kesef of the kiddushin, the ring, that which is being used for the kinyan, for the acquisition. It doesn't work in a situation where she gives it to him. But there are circumstances, depending on who the person is that is involved, that it's so special to him to be receiving this. The pleasure that he gets, that he's receiving a gift from her, he is able to, that pleasure itself is the act of the kinyan of the kiddushin. He says it's that case, the person who is giving, it's as if that person is the receiver. Unbelievable statement that you could be a giver, but you're actually a receiver and you're receiving something. When God receives something from us for the Mishkan, we're taking something, because just the act of us giving something to Hashem, we're giving something up from ourselves for Hashem, we're contributing towards the Mishkan, we're taking. Yes, we're doing an act of giving, but on a soul level, we dig deeper, we're the ones who are receiving. We know that, just go back to the very beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, for example. It says, Yitgaber Ka'ari, work really hard to get up early in the morning. Why? To serve Hashem. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kilakach nivra ha'adam, because that's what we are created for. We're created in order to have that connection with Hashem. The Mesilat Yesharim, especially in Perek Aleph, talks about how the entire reason why we're here is to experience that closeness to Hashem. And how do we accomplish that? Through the things that we do while we're alive on this earth. So when we're donating towards the Mishkan, we're fulfilling the purpose of our creation. We're creating first of all, a place for God's presence to dwell. And even more than that, we are connecting to Hashem through that act. So yes, physically, we might be giving, but no. We're the ones who are taking. And Hashem specifically uses the terminology of the new to tell us, when you give to me, you are actually taking. That's lesson number 1 from this parsha. When we give up for Hashem, when we give to Hashem, when we give tzedakah, when we do chesed, we give of our time, we're doing an act of giving, but on the deeper level, understand that we're taking. Because by doing these actions, we're fulfilling the purpose of our creation. Lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, on the same point. The Rambam asks the same question. Lama nemar v'yikhu v'lo v'yitnu. Why does it say giving instead of, why does it say that you're taking instead of giving? He says, Lefishe be'emet, hakol shayach laHashem yitbarach. Every single thing really belongs to God. He's the creator. It's all in his domain. But what? When you use that which Hashem has given to you for the right purposes, at that moment, it becomes yours. It becomes yours when you use it for the purpose that Hashem gave you. Otherwise, it belongs to Hashem. It becomes yours when you use it for the right purpose. So he says, what's happening therefore? When you give to the Mishkan, you're using that which Hashem gave to you for the right purpose. At that moment, that possession became yours. And therefore, it's v'yikhuli truma. Because the moment that you donate towards the Mishkan, that's when those possessions actually were taken by you to become yours. This really brings to mind, the Gemara says in Brachos Lamed Hey and Aleph, Rav Levi asked the question, he says, I don't understand. On the one hand, it says, LaHashem ha'aretz umloa, that everything belongs to God. On the other hand, it says, Hashemayim shemayim LaHashem, but ha'aretz, that which is on the ground, Natalim de Adam, he's given to human beings. So which is it? Is it all in God's domain, or is it man's? Answers Rav Levi, lo kashya, kan kodem bracha, kan la'achar bracha. Before the bracha, it was Hashem's, but once you use that food to give thanks to Hashem and recognize that it comes from Hashem, you use it to connect to Hashem, then at that point, it becomes yours. That same idea, this is lesson number 2, to recognize nothing is ours. When does it become technically ours? When we use it for the right purpose. When we use that which Hashem has given to us for spirituality, for acts of meaning, then we're taking it for ourselves, it becomes ours. But otherwise, it's not. And therefore, we should recognize that everything we have is ultimately to be used for Hashem. And never have the attitude of, I don't want to use that for the connection to Hashem. I want to use it for myself. That's not what it's there for. Lesson number 2, the things that we have are not here to service ourselves. They're ultimately here to fulfill our mission on this earth, which is spirituality, which is meaningful activity, which is connecting our neshama ultimately to Hashem. Moving on to lesson number 3. The Parsha, still in the very, very beginning, what does it say? Who are these contributions and donations supposed to come from? Me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo. Shmon chafei bet, the one who has a desirable heart, tikhu et trumoti. That's where Hashem wants the donations from. Says the Chatam Sofer, Hakol HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every single object belongs to Hashem. We're seeing this theme continuing all the way through here. V'hatormim, when you give something to Hashem, you're not giving that object to Hashem. It was Hashem's all along. What are you giving? All you can give is your heart. All you can give is your passion. That's what you give to Hashem. That's what comes from inside of you. The physical objects, they're always Hashem's and they remain Hashem's. What we're giving is our desire, is our passion, is our yearning to be able to connect to the divine. If you don't give with a full heart, therefore, unbelievable statement from Chatam Sofer based on this pasuk. If you give it physically, but your heart isn't in it, it's just checking off a box. This is what I'm commanded to do. But now what you have a passion for, well, guess what? It's as if you gave nothing, because the object already belonged to Hashem. All that you can give is your heart and your passion, your desire and your yearning. And therefore, if you don't have that, you've given nothing. And that's why it's specifically, who does Hashem want these trumot from? Asher yidvenu libo. He doesn't want the objects. Hashem can make a mishkan on his own. What he wants is the desire of the people wanting to connect to him. That's what he's seeking. Says the Torah mitzvah on the bottom of the Malbim, afilu ema latet. A person has nothing to give. Imagine someone who's destitute. They have nothing to give to Hashem. And all they have is a desire, a passion. I want to connect. Take that. Take that passion. Take that. Because, as the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Kuf Vav and Aleph, Rachmana Liba Boy. What does Hashem want? He wants the heart. That's what he wants. We live in a world where we're so focused on What's the halacha? Checking off the boxes. I did this, I did that. All of the actions. And we're supposed to do the actions. But Hashem wants the heart. Hashem wants the soul. Hashem wants the yearning to connect to Him. He wants us to be seeking that connection as we learn Torah and as we do the mitzvot. Because without that, it's essentially worth nothing. This very much brings to mind the story, the Baal Shem Tov in Shul, and everyone is there davening with all of their kavana, spending all day Yom Kippur davening for tshuva, and then the shepherd boy comes in and he whistles. And everyone says, what is going on over here? Whistling in shul, how can you do that? And the Baal Shem Tov said, no, that's the most meaningful prayer of the day, because he doesn't know how to daven. He doesn't have the machzor. He doesn't know all the halachot of the day. But what he has is a desire in his heart to connect to Hashem, and he used what he had to do that. He even said, I believe that's what broke the gates of heaven to the prayers that day in that shul. That's what we have to learn from this pasuk. The giving is important. The actions are important. But lesson number 3, what we can truly give to Hashem is the heart, is the soul, is the passion and the yearning. And that is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is seeking from us. And that is what we have to dig in deep and try to bring out during the course of our lifetime and use in our Avodat Hashem. Rahmana li'babai. Hashem wants the heart. That is lesson number 3. Every mitzvah that we do, let's make sure that it's not just an action, but there's the heart behind it. There's the meaning behind it, and there's the connection to Hashem behind it. Moving on to lesson number 4. It's a lesson that we repeated other parashiyot as well. Va'asu li mikdash. Hashem says, make for me this sanctuary. Shemot chafei chet v'shachanti. Make me the sanctuary, and I will dwell. You're expecting the word to be in it, but it's bitocham, in them, among them. Says the Kotzker Rebbe, bitocham nemar, v'lo bitocho, I will dwell amongst them and not in it. L'lamedecha, to teach us, shekol adam chayav livnot et hamishkan belibo. We all have to build a mishkan in our hearts. HaKadosh Baruch Hu shochei b'tocham, and Hashem will dwell in our midst. We have to remind ourselves of this idea day in and day out, how we as human beings are vehicles to receptacles of the neshama, which is a connection to the divine. It comes from Hashem Himself. We need to create in ourselves, in our homes, a place for Hashem. And just like the Mishkan, it's going to have all kinds of specifications and detail, which Hashem says you need in order to have the Shekhinah dwell there. That applies to us in our lives as well, inside our bodies and in our homes. We have to make sure that we create the atmosphere of spirituality, which enables Hashem to enter. And that's not, by the way, just about the X's and the O's of the mitzvot and the halachot, but again, it goes back to the attitude. And it goes back to, are we creating a place where there's a seeking of Hashem's Shekhinah to dwell? That needs to be there as well. If that was needed for the Mishkan, the Nidvenu Libo, then it has to be in our homes as well. And we have to have that passion and desire and create that atmosphere for Hashem to dwell inside of us and for Hashem to dwell inside of our homes as well. By the way, as an extension, I would say in our shuls as well. Shouldn't be just places where, again, we're just doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing according to Shulchan Aruch, but to go that extra level and make sure that we create a place that has real Kedusha, which enables Hashem's Shekhinah to be there. Lesson number 4, make ourselves a Mishkan for Hashem, v'shachanti b'tocham. Moving on to lesson number 5. We now start getting to the details of the vessels of the Mishkan, and the first one is the Aron. Shemot Chaf He Yud. What does it say? Ve'asu Aron, in the plural. Points out the Alshich, B'chola Kelim. When it comes to all the other vessels of the Mishkan, Nemar Va'asita. It says, and you should make. Ve'etzel ha'aron, and by the Aron, it's the only one, Nemar Va'asu, where it says it in plural. But Lashon Rabim, in the plural. Why? Why is it in Lashon Rabim? Lehorot, says the Alshich, Sheketer Torah, Eino Keketer Kahuna O Malchut. The crown of Torah is not like the crown of the priesthood or of kings. Shezachu lehem rak zera David va'Aron. To be a king, you have to come from David HaMelech. To be a Kohen, you have to come from Aron. That's not the case when it comes to Torah. Ki Torah nachlat kol Yisrael. Every single Jew has the capacity to make Torah their own and to crown themselves with the crown of Torah. As the Gemara says in Kedushin Samach Vav Aleph, the Torah hare krucha u'manacha b'keren zavit. It's sitting there on the street corner. Kol harotza lilmod yavav lilmod. Anybody can come and learn Torah. So many people make excuses or protect themselves from responsibility and say, I can't become a Talmid Chacham. I can't master all of Torah. Either my upbringing wasn't that way, or I'm too busy right now. I'm earning a livelihood. I have a family. I'm busy with other things. Other people can learn Torah. That's not necessarily for me. Every single person can become a Torah scholar, can become a Talmid Chacham. You can do it by squeezing it in at every opportunity that you have. First step is to recognize that it's there for you. Ve'asu et Aron. There's no person who cannot connect to Torah and become that Talmid Chacham. The greatest example of that, as the story is described, the Avodah of Nasan, is Rabbi Akiva. What other example do we need? 40 years old, he hasn't learned anything. He's standing by the water. He sees that there's a penetration that takes place into the rock, and he realizes that the water just dripping there every single day made a difference. Rabbi Akiva said, I'm going to go learn a little bit of Torah. He begins learning Aleph Bet, age of 40, and eventually becomes Rabbi Akiva, the Torah leader of the Jewish people. Every single one of us can accomplish it. It's a question of desire. It's a question of ratzon. It's a question of priorities. And then you can make that happen. And that's why it says, Ve'asu et Aron, in plural, to teach us that Aron, which represents Torah, that is there for everyone. And that is lesson number 5 in this week's Parsha. Never say, I can't, when it comes to learning Torah and becoming a Talmid Chacham. Every single person can do it. The Torah is there for us, and that's why it's written in the plural. Moving on to lesson number 6. The details of the Aron. Va'asu Aron atzei shitim, amatayim v'chetzi arko, ama v'chetzi rachbo, ama v'chetzi kamato. Notice the measurements of the Aron. 2.5 amot long, 1.5 amot wide, 1.5 amot tall. Half, half, half. Says the Kli Yakar, hayo kol amot ha'aron shvurot. It's the only vessel in the Mishkan where every single measurement is in a fraction, is in a half. Why? Lahorot shekol adam idma benafsho ki'ilu hu chaser min hashleimut hachachma. Every single person must say, I am lacking when it comes to Torah learning. But you have to keep on going. There's never a limit to how much Torah you can learn. And that is why it's written with the half measurements. What a beautiful idea. You're always half when it comes to learning Torah. There's almost always so much more that you can learn. Who can say that they've mastered every single sefer that's out there? Who can say that I'm done? And we know that, what do we say in the tefillah after we make a siyum on a masechet? Hadran alach, masechet, whatever it is, hadra halan, daitalach, I'm coming back to you. I'm not learning it and then putting it away, because Torah learning is constant. There's always more to learn. And that is why we call a person who knows a lot of Torah, we call them a Talmid Chacham, because they're always a student. There's always more to learn. There's always more insights to have. Even when we're reviewing the things that we've learned before, you're always going to see it in a new way. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky talked about how the Torah, even the simple reading of the Psukim in the Torah, can be viewed, he said, as the tzitzit that are given to a little child when they turn 3 years old. They have these cute little tzitzit. Maybe there's a cute picture on it. When that child is 6 years old, if he's wearing the same tzitzit, it's a little bit awkward, but okay, it can pass. If that child is wearing the same tzitzit when they turn bar mitzvah, there's something really wrong there. It doesn't add up at all. It should not be happening. He says Torah learning is the same way. He says there's a way you learn Torah when you're 3 years old. There's a deeper level when you're 6 years old. There's a deeper level when you're bar mitzvah, and that continues throughout your lifetime. There are always gems, new insights to have in every single pasuk in the Torah, and every statement of Chazal, and in all the Sfarim that are out there to learn. Chetzi, chetzi, chetzi. You're supposed to look at yourself as I'm only halfway there. We mentioned in the previous lesson that Torah is there for everyone to learn. That takes us to lesson number 6, which is there's never an end to Torah learning. You always have more to go, and keep that going throughout your life. There's never a place of retirement. I've fulfilled the amount of Torah that I'm supposed to learn. Chetzi, chetzi, chetzi. You always have to do more in order to become full in your Torah learning. That's lesson number 6. Lesson number 7, on that same question about the midot of the Aron being halves, says the Baal HaTurim, Kol midotav hayush vurot bechatzei amot. Why is every single measurement of the Aron done in halves? L'lamed shekol mishalomi Torah sarich lishbor ulahashpil atzmo. When you learn Torah, the only way you'll be successful learning Torah is if you do it with humility, with anava. You have to lower yourself. You, of course, you can be proud of the learning that you're doing, but not let it puff yourself up and say, I'm the greatest thing that there could be. Torah will not resonate to a person in that situation. It says the Gemara in Tanit, Zayin of Aleph, Amar B'chanina Bar Idi, Lamadim Shalu Torah, L'mayim. Why is Torah compared to water? Lo Melcha, to tell you, Ma Mayim, just like water. Benichim Makom Gavoa leaves the high ground. V'hochel Makom Namacha goes to the low ground. Af Divrei Torah, Ein Midkaimin El Bami Shedaito Shvela. You can only really master Torah if you're approaching it with humility. If you realize this is God's wisdom, it's such a schut, what a merit for me to be learning this. I'm just a lowly human being, not lowly in the sense of beating yourself down, but recognizing that humility, recognizing that this gift is coming from Hashem, and I'm just so honored to be part of this, and not to see yourself as being super great because you've learned Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest Torah scholar, the greatest Torah teacher in the history of the world, was the Anav Mikol Adam. And that is why he was the most modest of all people, the most humble of all people. Moshe recognized that he was great. He recognized how much Torah that he knew, but he didn't allow that to take himself and make himself feel that he's above other people, that magialo, that something is coming to him for it. No, I'm created for this. I want to be learning Torah. I want to connect to God's wisdom. And I'm humble about it. That's where Torah can resonate. And that is why, according to the Baal HaTurim, that is why the measurements are in half. Don't view yourself as this full, complete, wonderful person. Lower yourself. Be humble. Then Torah can have the impact that Torah is supposed to have. Lesson number 7. One of the ways of acquiring Torah is by being a person who lives with humility, especially when it comes to the Torah that they're learning. Moving on to lesson number 8. Still on the Aron. Sadly, we don't have time to go through every single vessel of the Mishkan. Chafei Yud Aleph. What do we do with the Aron? Mitzipita oto zahav tahor. We cover it with gold. Mibayit umichutz titzapenu. That gold is not just on the outside of the Aron, but that gold also goes on the inside of the Aron. There's gold and there's wood, and there's gold on the inside. You're never going to see the inside. I understand the purpose of putting gold on the outside to show its beauty, to inspire us. Why are you putting on the inside when no one's going to ever see it? The Gemara and Yoma, Ayin Bet Amabet, we learn from here, Amarava, Kol Talmid Chacham she'ein tocho kebaro, eino Talmid Chacham. You cannot be a Talmid Chacham if the gold is just on the outside. Your inside has to be just like the outside. Externally, outwardly, you're learning Torah. To be a Talmid Chacham, it's not just about the mind. It's not just about the scholarly pursuit. It has to be something that changes you. That gold has to be not just on the outside, but also on the inside. The Rambam has this beautiful, beautiful description of what a Talmid Chacham is supposed to be. Hilchot Deot, Parakeh, Kishem Shachacham Nikar B'Chachmato U'B'Deotav. Just like a Talmid Chacham is clearly different than everyone else because of his wisdom and his Torah knowledge, who moved al mehem b'shar ha'am, it does make him distinct from the rest of the nation. Kach tzarich sheyeh nikar b'ma'asav. You have to see it in the way they act as well. What kind of person they are, their insides, how they eat, how they drink, how they speak, how they walk, how they dress, how they do business. They have to be on the highest of levels. They have to be the most refined, the most dignified that you can find. That's a Talmid Chacham. It's not just how many Masechtot he knows. It's not just does he know the Shulchan Aruch backwards and forwards. It's not just does he know all the commentaries. It's what kind of person he is. That's why the Aron is covered in gold, both on the outside and on the inside. Tocho kibaro. His inside has to be like his outside. The Aron is representing Torah. Torah cannot just be external. It cannot just be something which is in the mind. It cannot just be a scholarly pursuit. It has to transform who we are. The Halavai, lesson number 8, that we would see people who are Torah scholars, Talmidei Chachamim, that would act in this way. And we, in our pursuit, Talmidei Chachamim, we've sort of got this train going through over here in terms of what follows what. We started out with the Torah is available for everyone. We talked about how there's always more Torah to learn. We talked about you have to be humble in order to learn Torah. And now if you want to really be a Talmid Chacham, make sure that the Torah that you're learning is impacting what kind of person you are as well. That's lesson number 8, the gold on the outside and the gold on the inside. And that takes us to lesson number 9, this week's Parsha. As we go to the Kalim that are further in the Parsha, very interesting. We have first in Chafei Chaf Gimel, Asita Shulchan, make the Shulchan. And then we have Asiyat Menorah, Chafei Lamed Aleph, make the Menorah, Asita Menorah Zahav Tahor. The Menorah in Torah thought represents the light of Torah, represents learning Torah. You think that should have the priority in the discussion, in the list of the Kalim of the Mishkan. But the Shulchan comes first. The Shulchan represents the food, the physical. Why is the Shulchan mentioned before the Menorah? Says the Ketav Sofer, Hikdim Shulchan lo Menorah. Why does the Shulchan come before the Menorah? Me'oto tam, he says. For the same reason, Sha'amru Chazal, that our sages taught us, Al Shehikdim Zvulun liYisachar. Why is the tribe of Zvulun listed before the tribe of Yisachar? Lefisha Zvulun hu hamachzik lomdei Torah. We know that Yisachar and Zvulun had a relationship. Yisachar learned Torah, and Zvulun were the businessmen who supported Yisachar. V'ra'oi lagdimo lifnei alumdim. Hashem says, I'm putting Zvulun before Yisachar, because the person who's supporting Torah has more chashivut. He has more significance than even the person that's sitting and learning Torah. V'shulchan, he says, meramez al hamachzik. The shulchan is the bread in kemach in Torah. They're the ones that are sustaining the Torah. U'menorah ala osik b'Torah. The menorah is those who are learning Torah. Shulchan comes first, because the shulchan is the one who's supporting the Torah. That has priority in Hashem's mind over the person who's learning Torah. The person who's supporting Torah, he's in business, he's making money, he can use his money for anything in the world, and he chooses it to support Torah, that is the highest ideal imaginable. Actually, when we talked about the Aron earlier, the Badim, the poles of the Aron, which is the support of the Aron, they stay attached to the Aron forever. They're linked forever. There's no distinction between the two. That's the lesson of the Shulchan coming before the Menorah, just like Zvulun before Yisachar. Those who are supporting Torah, and Hashem's eyes, the challenge that they're overcoming in doing so, raises them to a whole other madrigah, and therefore the Shulchan comes before the Menorah. Let's remember, we've talked about how Torah is available for everyone. Everyone can become a Talmid Chacham. We talked about how to go about doing that. We talked about how a Talmid Chacham should live their lives. Lesson number 9 is, if you're not a person who is involved in full-time learning, which is certainly most of us, support Torah, support yeshivot, enable more people to learn Torah. And that puts you at a higher level, the shulchan before the menorah, zvulun before Yisachar, than even the people who are learning Torah themselves. Lesson number 9, the importance of being someone who in any way that you can supports Torah. Unbelievable. We just got up to the beginning of the Parsha, essentially, in terms of the Kelim, and we've already gone through 9 possible lessons to learn from them. Let's go through them quickly. Lesson number 1, v'yichnu li truma. When we give to Hashem, we are taking for ourselves. We're fulfilling the purpose of our creation by connecting to Hashem. And therefore, don't look at it as if you're giving something, but every time you do a mitzvah, every time you connect spiritually, every time you do a chesed, recognize that ultimately you're taking for yourself as you fulfill the purpose of why you're here on earth. Lesson number 2, on the same theme, but turning to the Malbim, everything belongs to Hashem. Everything belongs to Hashem. You only make it yours when you use it for the right purpose. Just like the bracha, the food is not yours. Once you recognize that it's from Hashem, you've internalized that idea, then it can become yours. To recognize that nothing that we have comes from ourselves, it all comes from Hashem, and therefore use it properly. Use it for Hashem, and don't use it just for yourselves. Lesson number 2. Lesson number 3. I give nothing to Hashem. It all belongs to Hashem. What can I give? I can give my heart. I can give my passion. I can give my yearning to connect to Hashem. And that's ultimately what mitzvot are all about. It's not about the physical act itself, but it's about the connection spiritually that we make to Hashem when doing so. And that's what Hashem wants to see. You're not giving anything to Him. It's the passion and the yearning and the drive for that connection, which is what it's all about. Lesson number 4, make ourselves a place for God to dwell. We've had that message before. The Torah clearly repeats it over and over again. It's such a critical piece. Do what we can to make our environment spiritual with the depth that is there to be able to accept Hashem dwelling in our midst. We continue on to lesson number 5. Va'asu et Aron. The Aron is in plural. Torah is there for everyone. Anyone can make Torah part of their lives. There are no excuses. There's no reason why you can't do it. Each person in their own way. It's available there for everyone at whatever stage in life you're at. Lesson number 6. The half measurements of the Aron, there's always more to learn. It's not just available, there's always more to learn. There's never a point where you say, that's it, I've hit my maximum in terms of Torah learning. Always more to go. Hajjalach, we return over the same Masechet over and over again. We'll have new insights, new ideas. There's never an end to Torah learning. Lesson number 7. Another reason why the measurements of the Aron are in halves, because to master Torah, you have to have humility. You have to be half. You have to lower yourself and recognize you're not the greatest thing on earth. Of course, be proud, but also anava. To remember that Torah is like water. Water goes to the lowest of places. Torah goes to the people who make themselves lower and don't puff themselves up by saying, look how great I am in Torah. Lesson number 8. The Aron is covered inside, not just on the outside. To be a Talmid Chacham, it has to be the inside. It has to be what the Torah is doing to you and transforming the kind of person that you are, as the Rambam explained at great length, to be distinct, not just in your Torah knowledge, but in the way that you're acting. And finally, lesson number 9, the shulchan is put before the menorah. The support of Torah comes before the Torah learning itself. That's how much Hashem sees supporting Torah learning as important. Let's make sure, of course, we're learning as much Torah as we can, but also use the gifts that Hashem has given to us in order to support Torah learning as well. Let's try, as we learn this parsha about the construction of the Mishkan, of the details of what has to go into building the Mishkan, to make any of these lessons or all of them as part of our lives as we strive to be greater over the Hashem and connect more to Hashem, fulfilling our ultimate purpose of being on this earth. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for joining us.